Hey there everyone, this is Heather Leah, WRL's Hidden Historian, and today I am on sacred land, carefully treading. This is a cemetery behind me, and it's been found in the woods. It's like a swath of a wooded area in Johnston County. It's right alongside a highway, but many people did not realize that this cemetery is here, and you'll see why in a minute. It's pretty overgrown, and we're going to take a look at part of it's been cleared out by descendants of people who have been buried here, and they are going to open it to the public tomorrow for people to come visit and see it. But I wanted to show you today so you can really see what it looks like. But this cemetery behind me, and again we're going to take a look around in a minute, historians believe that it is probably a little over 200 years old, and that this land was once part of a plantation here in Johnston County. And it would have been common in those times that the people who were enslaved on the plantations would need somewhere to bury their loved ones. But they didn't have access to really elaborate headstones or engravings or anything like that. And so a lot of the graves would be marked with a field stone. And I'm going to go ahead and turn the camera around so you can kind of see as I talk to you. Now, some of the graves are newer than 200 years old, and this cemetery, this is the part that's been cleared out. And you can see, again, a lot of it not in very good shape. But historians believe, and the descendants of people buried here believe, that this cemetery probably has potentially hundreds of graves, but they're unmarked. And see how the woods go much further back that way, and we'll go back there a little bit. I want to be cautious because I'm trying to avoid stepping on anyone's grave if possible. But a lot of them are not marked. So there's maybe like 27 marked graves. And again, even a lot of those they're newer, and that's why the headstones are still here. But a lot of them are fallen over or in some form of disrepair. This cemetery, again, historians and descendants of those buried here believe that it dates back probably to the 1820s, and there was a plantation here during that time period. After the emancipation, one of the people who was in fact enslaved on that plantation bought this land and several more acres of land. And it's very likely that that person who had been freed from slavery bought this land because his family was buried here. So if we take you back to the 1820s, 1830s, and you have, again, people enslaved on this very land out here, they would bury their loved ones, but they would not have access to something like this, right? One of these more modern headstones. And again, this isn't terribly modern. This is from 1917. Robert Johnson. And you can see that there are several headstones out here. And by the way, I'm going to show you some of the people buried here were really important people in the history of Johnston County. So we're going to walk and take a look around some of the cleared out area, and then I'm going to try to show you, because the cemetery goes all the way back into that whole area over there. And we'll take a look around there as well. So you can see some of the graves here are newer. Sanders is one of the main families you'll find buried here. And here, look at this one, died 1905. So there are descendants of people who were buried here who know that their ancestors were enslaved, and were enslaved on this property. And so back in the 1800s, if you were enslaved on this land and your loved ones died, a lot of times you would mark your loved one's grave with a field stone, something like this. So this is, this is very, very likely a headstone. Historians, of course, believe it is. One of the things at some point they hope to do is to do some sort of radar imaging to see where these graves actually are, because so many are no longer marked, right? There are graves all over here. You can see places where the ground has sunken, and that indicates that there would have been a grave there, and the casket has started to deteriorate underneath, and the ground is settling. So you can see where there are graves. But this is a kind of a good example of maybe using a field stone right here. There's no name on it. One of the issues with using a field stone is over the generations, if someone came out here to just clear this land, or even was just walking through, they might honestly just kick it aside or not realize that it is, in fact, a grave marker. On top of that, you can see there's no name. And because there's no name on, I mean, possibly hundreds of graves out here with no names, you have people buried out here. You can hear the highway nearby. You have people buried out here who we don't know who they are. We don't know their name. We don't know their story. And so there are, again, potentially hundreds of people buried out here in these woods. And again, it goes back really far into those woods over there, where there's just dozens and dozens and dozens of unmarked graves that you'll see sinking into the ground with no name attached. I'm going to show you a headstone in a minute that you can see where they tried to carve a name into the headstone, and I'll show you that. Again, some of these are newer, and that doesn't mean they're new. A lot of these are early 1900s. So, looks like after the emancipation, again, as I was saying before, after the emancipation, one of the people who was enslaved on this very property bought the land. It's an interesting tree. Bought the land because, very likely, partially because his parents were buried on this land, and he didn't want to lose the land where his family is buried. You can see there are headstones all the way out to kind of the property line. Then there's houses here. Now, I did talk to some of the descendants and the historians who believe it is very possible that there are graves. Again, we don't know. This is just conjecture by historians and the descendants of family. But there's a highway right there. It is possible that there are graves that would have been under that highway. We don't know exactly how far this cemetery extended. And when they put that highway through, they may not have realized that there were graves there. Again, if there were, we don't know for sure. That's the kind of thing that hopefully in time historians will begin to figure out. Now, some of the people buried here, if you go to the story, here's a really beautiful headstone, very ornate. Willie, son of Bristol and Susanna Creech, the Creech family. He was born in 1885, died in 1911. So, the Creech family, when we talk about some of the people buried out here, now we do actually know who some of the people out here are. This grave, to me, it looks like somebody marked along the lines here of where the person is buried. Looks like it was somebody's mother. So again, some of these are really in good shape. This was a place where families continued to bury loved ones even after emancipation, even into the early 1900s. I did speak to one descendant of people buried here who said his grandfather was buried here in the 1960s. And again, we've got headstones that go from being more ornate and traditional to simply a field stone. And again, we have people who are ancestors of those buried here who know that their ancestors were in fact enslaved on this land. And if you're interested in this history, they're going to open this up to the public tomorrow. So you'll be able to come out here if you want to and learn a lot more about this history from people who know a lot more about it than me. I wanted to show you this. You can see, it looks to me like it might say Jack, maybe Tack, I'm not sure. It's an old carving. But here is an example of somebody who used, looks like just a field stone, kind of a flat field stone, and tried to make their own headstone by carving in just the name. And again, I'm not sure what name that's, if that says Jack or Tack, I'm really not sure. And I don't want to do them any injustice. But this is a sad reality, and again, I don't know who this particular person is. But a sad reality of the enslaved people who were buried here, men and women, children. If there aren't names on their headstones, we may never know who they are. That they're not just gone, but their stories, their name themselves, like, disappears with them. So there is a sorrow in a cemetery like this, where you're not just losing life, but you're losing the stories as well. Now, I'm going to try to go a little bit further back here. Last time I went back here, I went through a different entrance, but where it was a little easier to get through. But I'm going to see what I can show you deeper in the woods here. But I'm going to try to be very careful. And again, out here is where you find a lot more of the unmarked graves. But there are quite a few everywhere. So some of the descendants that I spoke with told me that they have loved ones buried here or ancestors buried here. One of them, and this is not a history that I am particularly familiar with, but is apparently a very well-known story about a moonshiner named Percy Flowers, and that this gentleman's family member, a Creech, was someone who was like the right-hand man of this famous legendary moonshiner, Percy Flowers. I also spoke with another woman who has family who is buried out here, and she said her family played a major role in being teachers and educators in Johnston County. So the people buried out here, we're talking about generations and generations of people who made an impact on Johnston County history, that are out here and potentially nameless. You know, of course they're not nameless, but there's no more evidence, there's no more remnants of their names. I see some headstones, we're going to go towards them. So some of these ancestors are really hoping, or some of these descendants are really hoping that this could become a more cleaned up cemetery. Here's a great example of, again, a very personalized headstone or marker. It looks like someone tried to carve something into that. And again, take into account that there was a time where if you were black, it was illegal to teach you how to write or how to read. And so these are people who are not being allowed to get education, but are still finding ways to try and carve their loved ones' names onto a fieldstone. Oh my gosh, you can see a lot of fieldstones out here. I'm going to show them to you. This is a good example of what would happen if a family didn't have money or resources. So this stone right here, very, very likely a headstone. Somebody's marker. And then there's another one right here. And I can see another one there and another one there. And this is why it's important. I see another one there and there. There are several in here. This is in the heavily wooded area, where it's very hard to access. I mean, this very likely is somebody's headstone. This little piece right here. So when you're out here in the woods, and you can see I'm just literally like pushing through. There's no trail here. This is a cemetery. It's a cemetery where people are buried, but they don't have names on their headstones. And they don't have as many people coming to visit them or bring them flowers. And by the way, if a loved one does want to come and bring them flowers, can you imagine having to crawl through all of this? So, looks like I found one here. Look at this. This is clearly hand carved. I wonder how old this is. If you can read it, tell me. Yeah, this is definitely a headstone. Maybe Anne. I wish I could read it better. But I mean, this is a great example of families that, I mean, possibly this was put here during slavery, and it could be that a family buried a loved one here who died while enslaved, and did not have any financial ability to create a marker like that. It also could be more modern, and it could be something from after the emancipation, but still possibly a family that just didn't have the money to purchase something like that. And can you imagine that this is the headstone that you personally lovingly carve for your family member who has passed? I feel like, I mean, I just almost want to imagine the person who sat down and carved this for someone that they loved who died. I see Harnett County Cemetery Preservation. If someone wants to start a group, this is a comment they're making. If someone wants to start a group, they can contact us and we will guide them through getting a group started. Yes, that is a good point. I'm gonna be thinking about this headstone tonight. Here's another headstone. And then over here you can see what looks to be a slightly higher quality or more professionally made one. But I am surrounded by these field stones, which again was more commonplace prior to the emancipation. So speaking of cleaning up the cemetery, here's a newer one. Who is this? Wife of Samuel Wellens, maybe? As far as cleaning up a cemetery, I do know that the descendants of some of the people buried here are very hopeful, and some historians are very hopeful, we're going to go a little deeper in, are very hopeful that there are things that could be done out here. I know that Oberlin Cemetery, which was kind of a similar situation at the time, very overgrown, and has people buried there who very likely were enslaved when they died. Here's another little tiny headstone. I'm trying very carefully to not trip over any of these or cause any damage. And Gear Cemetery in Durham, I've written about both of those, and they had volunteers and they raised money, and they were able to, you see the highway right there, and they were able to do a ground penetrating radar that showed them exactly how many graves are beneath the earth. And that would be a good starting point to know where the graves are so they could be marked, because really almost any of this could be graves. They're all the way out here into the woods, and I do know that the graves go all the way to the wall. By the way, the Johnston County Agricultural Center is just right there. So this is some place where people visit regularly and drive past regularly and probably have no idea that they are going right past a cemetery with all of these people who are buried here without even a name on their headstone. So finding out who is buried here and where they're buried would be a starting point, right? Having volunteers to find where the people are buried and to find out who these people were and tell their stories. Another would be volunteers to come and clean up the cemetery, but you have to be careful when you clean it up, because as you saw, a field stone, a little thing that looks just like a rock, that could be a headstone and you don't want to move it, right? So this is what I wanted to tell you. If you're interested in this kind of history, first of all, I have a link to the full story. We actually have photos of some of the people who are buried here because some of the descendants were able to share that with me. So that link to that story is right here in the post. So if you go above, there'll be a link. You can click it, or you can go to WRAL.com and it'll be on the homepage. Just scroll down a little bit and you should see it. The other thing is they are opening this cemetery to the public tomorrow, and it's part of a larger event. The event is called Reclaiming the Black Past, and it's going to be here at the Johnston County Agricultural Center. They're going to have some of the descendants of the people buried here. They're going to have storytellers and historians. They're going to have artifacts and exhibits. And there is a lunch, so I think you have to buy a ticket for the lunch. But the story has all of that information in it. If you want to come and see this cemetery and learn about the history, that's a good starting point, because knowing it's here and knowing that there are people here, I mean, that's kind of at least where it could start. So that is what I wanted to show you today. Thank you so much for joining me to look around this beautiful cemetery that could benefit from some love and some attention. And I know that they're going to give it some of that love and attention tomorrow. Again, you can go to the story. The full story about the history is online, WRAL.com. And again, you can click the link above. Otherwise, I'll see you next time for more hidden history. And thank you for joining me today. Bye, everyone.